Classmates, Justin Bergeron here. I want to start out by apologizing for my late submission to this week's discussion board. I'm talking about eights on pylons this week. It's, I think, one of the coolest commercial maneuvers. It's, they say, definitely the most difficult, and I think one of the most rewarding. So you definitely know immediately whether you got it spot on or if you didn't. So the purpose is to help develop the intuitive control of the aircraft. You want to learn to accurately and smoothly maneuver aircraft while dividing your attention between ground-based points as well as the aircraft's flight path. And this maneuver will also clearly show how wind will affect an aircraft's path of travel. So every day and even throughout the day, the wind's changing, and so your maneuver's going to change up a little bit. But hopefully, with the right practice, you shouldn't really be noticing. So according to the ACS standards, you have to predetermine your pivotal altitudes. That's going to be during your pre-flight planning. Getting ready for the flight, you need to know your winds aloft, you need to know your surface winds, you need to know the direction and what your ground speed's going to be, so that way you can determine your pivotal altitude. So you have to clear the airspace upon entering the maneuver. You need to select suitable pylons. So that's talking about no trucks that might move, no people that might move, no cattle that's going to run away as you're circling ahead. You need to enter at a suitable altitude, which is going to be that pivotal altitude that you've already calculated, as well as entering at an airspeed that's appropriate, which is usually found in your POH or just below your maneuvering airspeed. You have to maintain appropriate bank, which is not to exceed 40 degrees. And if it's done perfectly correct, you really shouldn't be altering your bank. And you need to divide your attention between the interior of the cockpit as well as the exterior. So now that we're working on commercial, everything's mostly VFR. And so you're looking outside the aircraft, although for your altitude and your airspeed, you need to be referencing inside the airplane to get that information. You need to select an appropriate emergency landing area. So I personally usually use a couple crossroads and along one major road. So I mean, that right there is a great spot to land. Preferably no telephone wires or power poles or anything like that. So we're required to stay, for this maneuver, 600 feet AGL. We know 500 feet AGL is our minimum, and when there's someone down there, that could be a hazard to them, so we're required to stay at 600. And usually not to exceed 1,100 feet AGL, just because you have to be going pretty fast for your pivotal altitude to be that high. So make sure to use position reports. There's other people out there. Let's all be safe. Let's all talk. There's no reason to not be talking. And then continuously scan for traffic as well as other hazards. I know in the last 3 days I've had multiple too close for comfort encounters with birds. So some other considerations are picking pylons that are perpendicular to the wind. If it's not perpendicular, then it's going to be, when you're in your turn, it's going to be kind of unreliable as to what the wind's going to be doing. So you want to enter the maneuver on the downwind, where your ground speed is the greatest. Pylons at the same altitude is going to really help, because at different altitudes, that's going to be you're going to have to be climbing in order to maintain your pivotal altitude, which is going to decrease your airspeed, and that's just going to mess everything up. It's going to make it more difficult for you. Be cautious of towers and wires in the area, and that's something that, especially near roads, that's usually found, so that's something to watch out for. And like I mentioned, keep an eye out for birds. So what's cool about this maneuver is that you get immediate feedback as to how you're doing. You want each pylon to be in the center of your wing. So as it starts creeping forward, you know that you're too high, so you need to increase your airspeed to increase your pivotal altitude so it'll meet where you're at. So basically, if it's getting forward of your wing, you want to push down the elevator to catch up to it. If it starts falling back behind your wing to the trailing edge, then you want to fall back and let it catch up to you. And so that's kind of the easiest way to remember that. You just follow the pylon. And remember that small adjustments are usually all that's needed, because it doesn't take By the change in your elevator, you're changing your altitude as well as your airspeed. So everything is changing exponentially, and it's just really quick. So minor adjustments are usually all that's needed. Some ins and outs about the pivotal altitude. Wind affects the ground speed, which the ground speed affects your pivotal altitude. So it only takes a matter of seconds to go from being too low to right on to too high, and then having to get right back on it. And so it's easy to find. For knots, it's the ground speed squared divided by 11.3, and that's going to give you your approximate pivotal altitude, the number of feet AGL that you want to be to enter the maneuver. Some common errors associated with this maneuver is failure to continuously clear the airspace all around the aircraft throughout the maneuver. So while you're flying, you're in those turns, you want to be looking in front of you, you want to be looking to the left, you want to be looking to the right, down, below, and above. Because, like I said, I had multiple encounters with birds, and they come at you from every direction. And another common error is poor pylon selection. Failure to accurately assess wind direction and then correct for it. So if you don't know what way the wind's coming from, then it's going to be hard to select pylons that are perpendicular. Failure to establish straight and level flight with appropriate altitude and airspeed before entering the maneuver is another common error. Failure to maintain safe altitude above the ground. If you start getting too slow, too low, and you're below that 600 feet, just say it is unsafe for me to continue this maneuver. And the DPE is going to be a lot happier hearing those words from you than having you get down to 400 feet AGL and him having to tell you that, yeah, this is over, we're done. So, let's see. Failure to maintain airplane coordination is one of the biggest errors of this maneuver, because a lot of students, as that pylon goes from the center of their wing to the leading edge or the trailing edge, they're going to maybe do less or more rudder to try to keep it right there. Well, you want to maintain coordinated at all times. We're commercial standards now. We need to maintain coordination. So that's something that it's all elevator pressure that we're using to adjust for that, and bank. So you can't just skip or slid, because, I mean, you can really feel it in the seat of your pants. And the DPE definitely can. So, and then at the end, I have a couple of pictures. At the end of my slideshow, I have a couple of pictures to diagrams to show how an 8-on pylon looks, as well as the approximate pivotal altitude, and what is too high, what's too low, and what some of the bank angles look like. Thank you for tuning in this week. It's been a pleasure working through this course with everyone, and I look forward to getting into Stage 3 and seeing what everyone has to offer. Hope you all have a great last week of classes.